Welcome to the Embryo Adoption Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Mellinger. On this show, we explore the possibilities embryo adoption offers to families often struggling with infertility, though not always. Through insightful interviews and moving stories, we uncover the blessings of this unique path to parenthood. This podcast is brought to you by the National Embryo Donation Center, giving hope to those longing to grow their families. Now, let's get started.
Hey, we're so glad you're with us today. And before we dive into the conversation, a reminder that if this podcast is helpful to you, go ahead and share, rate, review, subscribe. We love those 5-star ratings on Apple Podcasts. It helps the algorithms, helps other people find the Embryo Adoption Podcast, so you can make a difference for somebody else for absolutely no cost just by doing one of those options. Thank you in advance. So let's go ahead and dive into today's podcast. We are talking about all the things that social workers have to do with the embryo adoption process, in particular with the National Embryo Donation Center, the way that we do it. So we're talking about the home study, the open donation agreement for people who choose to go open, and the mediation process that's entailed with that. We're also talking about our education and training that all of our embryo receiving families go through. And here to lead us through that is Rebekah McGee. Rebekah is the Embryo Adoption Program Coordinator and the lead social worker with our friends at Christian Adoption Consultants. So our team in the back office is working with her very closely. Great having you here, Rebekah.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
I'm excited to have you here, and I want to get into your personal story too, because it's a good one. So there's a lot to get into today, but I want to start here. You know, a lot of people ask, why require a home study? So I think we should just talk about that right off the bat. What are the advantages of a home study before we get into what's actually entailed in one?
Yeah, so I work with donors almost every day. I'm talking to donors through the mediation process. And one of their questions is, what's the vetting process like for these adoptive families? So even for their peace of mind, knowing that adoptive families have gone through training, they have been cleared by background checks, medical check, that their home will be a safe place, that you've even thought through adoption issues, about how to talk to our child about their story, all of these from the front end. A home study is just a universal starting place for all adoptions. So if you're going to do domestic, international, and embryo adoption, as we're really seeing that, even though sometimes it's not viewed as an adoption in the sense of like another type, this allows it to really be in that same category and treat it as such, because you've gone through preparation for how are we going to bring a new person into our family in a unique way.
So talk to somebody who's apprehensive about going through a home study. What all do they have to do? How much does it cost? That sort of thing.
I think there are a lot of myths about home studies, one being that we need to be completely prepared for a child at the home study. You really don't need a nursery set up. You don't need to have, everything in perfect condition. I've been a home study social worker for many years. I've written a lot of home studies in my career as an adoption social worker. And really it's mainly about the conversations and the way that families are going into this. Are they teachable? Are they willing to open up and talk to us about things? My husband and I, we are adoptive parents, and we actually had 2 different home studies in our process as well. And I remember feeling so nervous about, cleaning my closets and my pantry, and they didn't even open the closets. And I was so disappointed because I'd spent a whole Saturday cleaning them. But really it's, do you have any major safety issues like pools or weapons or pets? Like, do they have their pet vaccinations, or what's your safety plan? And some home study providers are going to want like a written fire escape plan, whereas some, they're just like, have you thought through it? So there can be some variations from each agency or provider as far as how in-depth that they go on a home study. Most are interviews, references. You're going to get fingerprints done for background checks. and the home inspection is really like, do you have a fire extinguisher? Do you have a safety plan? Not necessarily like, show me how you're going to escape the house in a fire. And so I think some families are very nervous about it. They're afraid to share about themselves, and it's their privacy, or fears like, what if they don't think that I'm going to be a good fit? And I would say most social workers, we want you to succeed. We want you to be an adoptive parent. It's really like, if there are red flags, let's flesh that out. Like, if you have had an issue that we need to talk through, be open with us so it doesn't show up in a background check or in a reference where they're like, by the way, this person, had this thing in the past, or like, I'm estranged from my family. Well, can we talk about that? And like, what does your family look like now? Or how are you going to move forward if that was to become an issue with your child? So I think there can be some issues that we just need to talk about it. I've had some families where their home study is not even written for embryo adoption. And so then maybe it's like, we are hoping to adopt a 5 to 10-year-old child. Well, now you're in the embryo adoption program. So how do you make that shift? What training have you done? How have you prepared now for embryo adoption? So that's really kind of what we're looking for in a home study review, is making sure all of the major things are covered. But I would say it's understandable to be nervous, but you shouldn't be nervous at the same time.
But you should be prepared to go into things that can be uncomfortable to talk about. Like, if you've had any major trauma in your life, you are going to need to reveal that. Whatever your income was, and whatever your net worth is, you're going to have to reveal stuff like that, right?
Yeah. And I think, some families are like, do we need to be millionaires, or do we need to not have any student loan debt? I think you can have debt. You can, it's just, how are you going to afford a child? You're going to have to show, how do you work out your monthly budget? And you may need to practice that a little bit before you get to the social worker coming in there and you're like, oh wait, I haven't even thought about what do I spend on a month in food. But you just need to make the numbers work out on your spreadsheet for, do you have room for the cost of children, and how are you going to pay for an adoption, or all the fees, if you do have a negative net worth, so what's your plan? Like, are you using fundraising or savings, or we're going to apply for grants? So those are the things that are addressed in there. And they do explore like your childhood, your upbringing, what is your dynamic with your family. So it's not well, you needed to have a rosy picture of a childhood in order to adopt. But if you didn't have that rosy picture, what are your coping skills? How are you prepared? And sometimes it's those adverse childhood experiences you had that are shaping you to be an adoptive parent, because you're going to uniquely be prepared for how to parent kids that may have questions about their identity, or are feelings of loss. So you'll say, hey, I lost my parent, or I, was in the foster care. So therefore I can relate in some ways to some emotions you're feeling.
I think what people are worried about is that they're going to be disqualified. And I think in most cases, folks who are really earnest about this and have thought through their motivation for wanting to do adoption, whether it's embryos or not, in 99% of the cases, I think those people probably have absolutely nothing to worry about. It's like the people who are worried about, have I lost my salvation? Well, if you're asking the question, you almost certainly have not, and you don't need to have anything to worry about. So I think it's usually an unreasonable fear, but just for peace of mind, like, what are the sorts of things that you've seen in your experience that can disqualify people from being adoptive parents that have cropped up on home studies?
Yeah, I think that would be certain criminal history. Not like I had a DUI in college and this has been a long time, but anything that had anything to do with children, any major, repetitive, unresolved, unrepentant issues, those can be anything that's like a red flag, like we have no one in our family support. It's just me and my spouse against the world. Everyone else is a terrible person. And you can't get a reference. Like if it's like, whoa, here's some red flags here, maybe we're going to refer you to a different provider because I don't want to stamp my name of approval on it. But I would say most things can be worked out in conversation aside from like specific criminal history issues that just you can't pass a home study with.
Yeah, well said. So, like we said, the vast majority, I would say just about everybody listening to this, if not everybody, has probably nothing to worry about. There is very little chance that there is some issue that would crop up that couldn't be worked out. What does it cost? People always wonder, and I know they vary, but do you have like a ballpark cost for what a home stay is normally going to be?
I quote 1,500 to 3,000. So some might be $1,200, but you're paying per mile for the social worker to come out to your house, or you're doing, like, so travel expenses. I mean, I would say that's a good fair range to budget is 1,500 or 3,000, and it can vary in different states, or if you're using, which provider you're using as well.
And for the NEDC, you all at Christian Adoption Consultants do provide some of our home studies for some of our families, but the one thing that you definitely do is you review the home studies that our families submit. Talk about that piece of the process, because I know sometimes people come through our doors and ask, well, if I've had a home study, why do I have to have it then reviewed by somebody else? There are good reasons for that. Yeah. Can you get into that?
So I would say most home study reviews, and I do read every word of a home study, and it's really translating it for the NEDC files in a way that the board and everyone will be able to say, like, this is similar to any other, because every home study is going to be kind of written a little differently, but in a different format. Some are from foster care, some are from a single social worker, some are from an agency. So they're all in different formats. So this gives you really like a cover letter that puts everything in a really clear way for the NEDC files as well. There are times where reading through a home study, I'll be like, whoa, we need to have a conversation. So then I'll do a Zoom call with the family, and I'll write up a little addendum about, like, hey, they were going down this path for foster care adoption or older child adoption, and now they're pivoting. And so this is based on our conversation. This is why this home study should be valid for embryo adoption. Or like they had a history of some kind of thing that was like, hey, we need to talk about that. It wasn't really fleshed out in your home study, just so I can have that on record, like, because, there's a lot of people who are accountable for these embryos, and, I'm also putting my stamp of approval, like, this family's ready to go. So if there was anything that was in me, like, oh, let's have a conversation about this. I want it in your file that we talked about it, and that, okay, after that, we have a piece about, like, they've processed whatever that was, or their family issue, any past, things going on. Like, I had a client who had some addiction issues in the past. And so it wasn't really fleshed out in the home study how that was resolved. But obviously we want all addiction issues to be like, what's your support plan? How's our safety network now, so that this isn't going to be an issue as you're parenting. And it had been years in the past, but it just had not really been, they had an addiction, and then it was moved on in the home study. I was like, okay, we need to talk about that, because you guys are on the line for it. I'm on the line for it. The donor family is like, hey, we want to make sure these families are vetted. So this is really, sometimes there's an additional conversation that needs to be had about something in the home study. But also part of the home study review is the training that everyone's going through. So you may have done specific training for your home study. Some of it's not necessarily targeted to embryo adoption, but different home study providers are going to have you read books or podcasts or articles, or watch, training videos. And so they could touch on different things. But what the NEDC training is, it's embryo adoption specific and NEDC specific, talking about here's what to expect in the whole process. Then there's also, adoption identity, understanding the difference between anonymous and open donation, and really what are not pros and cons, but what are the issues to think through in each type. And there are great videos in there that are really helpful. So everyone is really on the same starting page going through that training. Now, so that's also part of the home study review, is making sure you've gotten that training.
Yeah, and again, to underscore, everybody who goes through the NEDC program goes through the education and training that Rebekah is talking about. Just about everybody has to go through a home study review. There's one select group of people who come in through another route, who don't have to go through the home study review because of our relationship with the Snowflakes organization. But other than that, yeah, go ahead.
That's also because Snowflakes are embryo-specific home studies. It's not a home study that's written by a random social worker in a random place, where this might be the first embryo adoption home study they've ever written. Because there are many times where I'm doing home study review and I reach out to a family and I'll say, and some people don't even know which home study provider to work with, or they'll say, hey, I got your contact information from the NEDC. Can you explain to my home studies provider what an embryo adoption home study is? So there are times I'm really intervening even before your home study is complete, because they're like, what else, what do I need to write for this? Like, how is this any different? So yes, so that's why Snowflakes is just embryo specific home study. So they're making sure you've talked about everything about embryo adoption in that home study. So.
And by the way, if you're listening to this thinking about getting your home study, all we generally need is a traditional infant adoption home study. So if your person is asking questions like that, your provider, wherever you happen to live, just tell them it doesn't need to be anything different. It just needs to be a traditional infant adoption home study. And then once that is done, Rebekah will take a look at it and let you know if it passes muster, which again they usually do. But she's looking for issues, and if you're a donor listening to this podcast, hopefully you're really becoming reassured that at the NEDC there are a lot of checks and balances to make sure that this process, to the degree that we can, is made foolproof, and that these embryos that you are donating are going to healthy, stable homes. Nobody can guarantee that, but we do all that we can this side of eternity, and as human beings, to do that. And Rebekah's a huge part of that. Talk about the education part of it, though. I think people wonder about that. You said a little bit about it. There's some videos, there's some talking about the difference between open adoption and closed adoption. Lay it out for me. Like, what is somebody doing when they go through that, and how long does it take?
So these are self-paced modules. So each spouse is going to go through them, and you answer questions after each module, and I check all of the answers. So you can't just click through and be like, beep, 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 like some of them are open-ended, and I really do read them, where that's talking about like, how do you respond to this video, or how are you now prepared to talk about adoption with your kids? I'm reading those. So I'll also see if you're like copying, pasting between spouses. So,
and by the way, if people try, I'm sure people have tried to do that.
Well, there's only been like 1 or 2 times where I've emailed, and I also make sure you did all of the modules. So like the other day I had one spouse accidentally skip module 4, and I was like, I'm not going to send you your training certificate until you finish module 4, even though they'd already finished the last module. So they really are, it's a human, like it's me on the other end doing this. So it's not an automatic generated certificate. If families will email me and say, hey, I finished the training. I'm like, great. But it's not like, well, here in 15 seconds, here's your training certificate. Now I go and I read all of the answers and make sure that you, got a good grasp on it. And there are times where it's not like, well, you need 100% every time. If it's like a question like, what percentage of embryos are, whatever, it's like, that's not the heart behind, you needed to have gotten every single question right. But is there something that was like, whoa, that's a big, one that's off, that you just clicked through and clearly weren't watching
you want to know that people are actually absorbing the material.
Yeah,
because it's human nature to go through something like that and just get through. I mean, I just know me. If I was doing it, I would want to just, okay, get through. But there's a reason that we're making you do this.
Yes. And you can tell too, because I get emailed after you take the quizzes. So if you did them in like 3 minutes later and I got another quiz, I'd be like, you didn't. There's no way you watched the videos in 3 minutes. Um, so, but yeah, that's really most people, it takes them a little bit of time. I've had some families who they'll get access to the training and they finish it in one night. Like it's like date night, let's just crank all this out. And then some it takes them a month and I'm checking in like, hey, you good? You still working on the training? Because I haven't heard from you in a while. So it's really self-paced. And, I think the goal for families, for a lot of families in the NEDC process, in my understanding, is to kind of have your home study, your training, everything wrapped up at the time of that first visit to maybe be medically cleared at that visit and walk out ready to go to the next phase, which would be matching. And there are some people who, they're not cleared right away at that first visit. But to not have, okay, well, now I'm going to start my home study. You really could have all of those things in place at that first visit. So you could walk out of that visit and get going, looking at donors, matching, doing mediation if needed. So you don't have to wait. It's not like, do this, now let's wait another couple months and get home study. You could be moving along as soon as you're like, this is what we're doing. Get that home study done, get going. So
I think that's a good understanding. You really unpacked it pretty well. Hey, by the way, Rebekah, like when people talk to you after the training modules, what do they say that they've learned? Like, what have you found is the value of it?
well, I recently had two different families tell me that prior to the training, they thought they would do anonymous donation, but now they want to do open. So I thought that was really awesome because I've also been tweaking the training a little bit lately, adding a couple of slides here and there. And I really wanted, part of that is I wanted to clarify what openness was, and what are the standards, like what are the minimum things that most people are asking for. And part of that was I want not to scare off, but like if you don't really want to do open, don't do open. If you really are thinking I want an anonymous plan, then do anonymous because the donors are hoping for openness. So I've kind of put that in the training a little bit more, and we can unpack that later. But I think that's been a takeaway is families getting to understand what the reality of not just the next 6 months, 9 months, a year, but your beginning process is setting up for a lifetime of parenting a child through embryo adoption. So that's really what I want is for families to have tools in their toolbox to think through, like, what are ways that I'm grieving or my child could be grieving one day, so that they can be aware of it later on. And a lot of times in that pre-adoption process where your child isn't, in your home yet, these are just tools that you're going to draw from later. So that's really what my goal would be, is that you're thinking through, how can I be the best parent to a child through anonymous adoption or through open adoption? What are things I can think through? How can I keep a spirit of openness even in an adoption that's closed? Like, how can I have conversation be like, I wonder where you got your beautiful eyes. Have it be not something we're not allowed to talk about, like not have. And I think that's part of the training is going away from shame. Like, we don't want, your origin is not a shame story. It's a redemption story in a way, and getting these embryos out of the freezer and giving them a chance at life. And so that I think has been good feedback from the training as well, is like, how can we be in an environment that our children never feel that shame about their story.
Yeah, so good, so good. So let me ask you then about the open donation agreement and mediation process, because for those who do choose to go open, and I think probably more of our people choose open than anonymous. I don't know, it seems like that has varied over time. But the open route takes longer, but there are a lot of potential advantages to that. We don't try to influence you one way or another. It's totally up to you whether you go open or closed. But yeah, there are, as you said, I guess you would say, pros and cons or different factors. If you don't want to use that sort of loaded language that go with each. You need to understand those, and you will through the education. But for those who choose to go open, you're going to have to work out or try to work out an open donation agreement, or ODA for short, and you go through a mediation process to reach that. And this is what you are working with our donor and recipient coordinators on quite a bit, Rebekah. So take me through that process. What, from start to finish, what that can look like.
So when I've gotten cleared to work with family, first, the recipient family, adoptive family, they fill out a questionnaire that really tells me what their starting line is. Like, we're hoping for annual updates, direct contact, or like, we're not quite ready to share, we only want to share first names, or let's not share names. I kind of see, what is your starting line? So then, what I see on the files, I'm not sure is the same as what people when they're looking through the files are. So I can see like a past ODA if the family had previously gone through mediation, the donor family. So I set up video or phone calls with each of the donor families, and I asked them, some of them have donated in the past. They might have open adoptions with other children from embryo adoption. And so I say, what worked well? What are you hoping for? And try to get their starting line as well, and then try to meet in the middle. And if there's a family that they're like, hey, this is the context for why I'm feeling more reserved, then I'll try to explain that in a way to the donor family, like, hey, I recently had a donor and adoptive family. They lived 30 minutes away from each other. And so that was something for them to consider, like, are we going to meet at the park, or do we want, we want to keep things more private? And so really trying to figure out what is the middle ground for everyone. One of the things that's really interesting about the donors is there's so much diversity in them. They can be in their 20s, 30s, younger. They have small children or babies, or they could be elderly. Like, I'm working with a donor that's in his 80s right now. And not tech savvy. And so there's people who are married, single, divorced, and you're doing multiple agreements with one previously married couple, single donor families who they use, donor egg or donor sperm for their kiddos. And so that's how they created this embryo set. Some of them, they're raising kids that are genetic siblings to these embryos. And so they're wanting openness for the sake of their kids. And then there's some who are like, we've never told our children that they were donor conceived, and we don't want them to know that we're donating. We don't want them to know anything about this process. So there can be some that they're like, our kids are going to be part of the updates. They already saw your donor letter and they love you. And then there's some who are like, do not call, we really need to keep it private. So there's a real range on the donor side as far as their starting point and what their openness is. And there are some donors who are hurt because they previously donated embryos and families didn't hold their word. So I think that's why it's important for Christians to be in this space and to let your yes be yes and your no be no, and to hold to the commitment. And I think sometimes when I reach out to donors, it may have been years ago that they donated their embryos, and they've really not thought about it since being contacted by the NEDC saying, hey, we have a family for you to consider. And it brings up new grief for them. Or it could be now, oh my goodness, we're not going to be parenting these embryos. It kind of brings up a new set of emotions. I had a donor family a couple weeks ago. They were probably in their 60s, and he cried on the video call thinking about, I'm not going to be raising these kids that are part of me. And it's like, the reality was they weren't going to be, they were older, and but it just brings up a new set of emotions in them. So I think for adoptive families also to have compassion towards these donors, that these aren't heartless, like, we created too many embryos and we don't care. Like, they've lovingly donated them to the NEDC. They're lovingly making a plan, and they care. That's why they're choosing, about where they go. They want to have updates. Sometimes it's, I've had donors say, I'm just curious. I would love the annual updates because I'm going to be curious to know about this kid that's part of my genetics out there. Or, I had a family who they were like, we did IVF for years. So these embryos took years to create. And so I'm emotionally invested in what happens to them because, they went through that for so long. They searched the donor egg, donor sperms websites for forever. So they really do care, even if they're not genetically related to the donors. Some of them are, I try to say like, what's new on your file, like since your file, or tell me about your kids. And some of them are super braggy, like I have the greatest kids in the world. They love piano. And, one told me the other day, my son is an excellent driver. Like, I was like, that's the first, I've never heard that. I'll write that down to share. But they usually want to share like about their kids and why you should use their embryos because their kids are so awesome. And some are even like, hey, if something were to happen to me, would you make sure like that the family would keep in touch with my kids so that the genetic siblings would know each other one day? I've had donors' families say, the only reason why we did open is because I don't want my kids to date their siblings. I've heard that probably 4 or 5 times. So there's a lot of diversity in the donor side. So back to like the process, I have that starting point for the adopted family, starting point for the donor family. We do phone calls. I give a phone call or an email recap to the adopted family and say like, hey, talk to your donors. This is kind of the gist. Create a mediation draft and send that out to everyone to review. Sometimes there's like, hey, can you clarify this or let's tweak this? Again, most families, this is the first time they're seeing a document like this. So some families want to take their time with it and some will get it back to me the next day. I had one family, they did 2 mediations in 7 days. Like they were all concluded in 7 days. I was like, you win the award for the fastest mediations. And then some, it can take several months. It just depends on how slow everyone is to track down. Some families will sit on a draft for a while, then they'll print it out and it'll take them 2 weeks to get it notarized. And, I'm always trying to remind the donor family, remember what it was like when you're in this process, like how much emotion it is. And that's what these adoptive families are feeling. They're so ready to get on the transfer schedule, ready to move forward to this final phase. And, there are deadlines at the NEDC that the recipient coordinators have to turn in, the transfer sheet and all this stuff. And so we're kind of working on those deadlines every month. But I would say for the adoptive families, just to be patient and know, like, you won't miss what the Lord has for you. And he's going to, he is in control of all the timing, all of the transfer and medicine and all of it. And so even though it's perceived control, like we're trying to get things done, but really the Lord is the one that builds the house, right? So trusting that the timing will be exactly as it should be.
Yeah, that's 100% right. And for those of you who would be new to the NEDC process, I'll take a step back even further because you may be wondering, well, how did this potential donor and these potential matches, how did the donor and the recipient families find one another? Well, the way they found that was the recipient couple came and had cleared their 2 key hurdles that they need to be able to clear to match, which is that they pass the medical clearance and they have the home study completed and reviewed. And so they have gotten access to our online database of embryo donor profiles that are available. And what that looks like is it's almost like a dating website. I hate to use that analogy. And I've been married for 26 years. I don't even really know what that looks like, but I've heard, you scroll through cover boxes with some basic information. There'll be a picture if available. There's some basic demographic information about the people who were involved in the creation of the embryos, height, weight, hair color, eye color, ethnicity, all that sort of stuff. And the recipient families, then, if they find one of those profiles compelling, have a chance to click on it and get further details. And they're able to reserve that profile if they would like it, which when you reserve it, that means, okay, this is a set of embryos that I am interested in adopting. I'm interested in working out an open donation agreement with this other family, and that is how they get to Rebekah. And once they get to you, Rebekah, you're really looking for just a mutual level of comfortability and fit, right?
There have been a couple times it didn't work out. And I think that it's always, sometimes I talk to a family and they're like, we are on different planets as far as what openness we want. Sometimes the donor families will say, okay, well, I have these questions. And I need their response first before I'll move forward too. And so there can be times where we've had multiple conversations and it's not the right fit, which is really, it's hard for families to walk through that. And, I think that there's so much that the Lord does in an adoption process in adoptive families. I always tell families when they start the adoption process, I'm like, you're going to learn so much about the Lord through this, his provision, his sovereignty, his timing, and, all of the things. And I think that you can be really refined in this of learning to trust the Lord in it. And I think that's part of it is when a match doesn't go through, seeing how like the Lord is in control and this is a lifelong relationship. And so you want it to be not a forced, you want it to be the right fit. And so I've had both on the adoptive family side or the donor side say like, hey, this just doesn't seem like we're looking for the same type of openness. I wanted to kind of give a general, like what is typical for openness?
Please do.
There's a lot of questions about that. And a lot of times the donor families are like, we're open to what the adoptive family is wanting. But I would say most agreements are annual updates sent directly through email with like a photo and like interests, just like a little paragraph or two. That's what most donor families are hoping to receive. And some donor families are like, hey, reciprocal, we'll send an update back about our family and our kids. There's the option to say like we would have an open hand for visits, like to meet up one day, or no set plan, we will never meet up, or let's have a visit by the time the child is 3. And so some families, like I've had some donor families who are like, well, we always send a Christmas card out. Well, they let us send them our Christmas card. Or like, let's do phone numbers and exchange numbers and texts. And I've seen that really, and some are going to wait until you're pregnant or a live birth to do direct contact. And some are like, as soon as this mediation is signed, let's get going. Well, I'm excited. And I've seen it's really beautiful to see how families are, because these donor families are often so excited and hopeful for these embryos, and so, I'm always a little sad when the direct contact, I pass it off because I don't really get to see all the communication back and forth. Because in most agreements, I am the one telling the donor family, like, hey, this family has a transfer date scheduled on this day, and then I'll let them know afterwards what happened, and then until the point of direct contact. But I would say having the expectation that most donor families are looking for annual updates, just so like and then there are occasionally where they're like quarterly for the first year, or more frequently when they're little, when they're changing so much, but then maybe less later on. Or we'd love for our little kids to know their genetic siblings. So like maybe we'll have more of a plan for visits. Or I've had some donors who are like, I just want to know a child was born and then you don't have to contact me again. So it's really, there's a lot of diversity, like I said, in kind of what we see here.
Yeah, there's diversity within openness, and give somebody an idea of what the cost is for you because there is a cost to mediate an open donation agreement, and you do a great job over there at CAC. But if somebody is trying to count the cost, what would it be for this?
I really hate to say a number out loud because I don't know it off the top of my head, but
okay.
It's $1,800 for mediation for up to 2 donors, and then it's $450 for each additional. So it is a lot of work, a lot of back and forth, and it's through whenever you're doing direct contact. So it's really, it's a lot. But I
Well,
really,
yeah, you don't have to justify it.
yeah,
It's a valuable
yeah.
service. I just like to, one thing at the NEDC that we try not to do, you mentioned like not hiding, having a culture of openness. Right. We try to not hide any of our prices
Mhm.
because we actually want people to know what you're going to pay if you go this route before you take it.
Yeah. And I think, I had a family that I did their home study review and I did like a Zoom call with them. And they were like, we're really torn about open or anonymous. We could really go either way. And what I would say to anyone, because I talk to a lot of families in all kinds of adoption who they're like, what is the Lord calling us to? I don't think the Lord is lining up children and saying which one is more valuable, which one is better, anonymous or open, which one is the better Christian choice. So it's really then, what do you feel called to do? Do you feel like you'll be a more equipped parent through openness and having that tie to another family or medical updates or, you know, more answers for your child? Or are you willing to walk with a child through the unknown, which is anonymous, is really like saying, we don't know about your genetic donor family. Like, there's not a lot of answers that we have. We just have a couple lines on a piece of paper, not more and more updates over time. And so I think both are needed. And we're here on a rescue mission, right? We're getting these embryos out of the freezer. So they're all a worthy cause to, this is an answer to the call of embryo adoption. So then figuring out like what is the right call for you. And I think the training does help families kind of understand what are the different things to consider in that.
Really well said. And I'll underscore that point again. There's no right or wrong on open or closed. There's no right or wrong from a theological perspective. We have both. Both need to be adopted. You prayerfully make the choice, prayerfully and in an informed way. We'll make sure that you're informed because of what Rebekah does with the education curriculum. So you mentioned that your personal story is a little bit different. It's always interesting to ask somebody, why they do what they do, and in your case, it does connect to your own personal story. As you said earlier, you and your husband wanted to adopt before you had biological kids. Tell me that story, how adoption's been part of your life.
So my husband is a pastor, and when we were in seminary, he went to Southeastern Seminary in North Carolina, and we were, at the point where you're kind of considering how would we start our family, and we really just felt the conviction of like, we want to answer this James 1:27 call. We want to be to make sure that's something that happens, and so we decided to adopt first. Our son is from Ethiopia. He is 13 and a half right now, and then we ended up having two biological children as well. But we've been in ministry, we've been married 16 years, our whole marriage. And I actually graduated from Auburn University with a social work degree and did geriatric social work. And then I went back and got my master's from the University of Alabama, which, if you know, Southeast.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
No,
I mean, yeah, right, absolutely.
And the really ironic thing is I teach adjunct social work at University of Alabama now.
So who do you root for on football Saturdays?
I'm
Like in the Iron Bowl, who are you for?
Auburn, but the funny thing is my husband's a pastor here in Tuscaloosa now, so I have to be neutral. So if this gets posted on the internet, I didn't say anything. I didn't say a choice. So after we adopted our son, there were so many social workers in our story. And there were times where I would see them be like on top of it, wonderful, holding our hands. They're such sacred workers in our story. And then there was a couple of social workers who I felt like, do you even care? And so I was like, I want to be one of the good ones. I want to be someone who's fighting for these kids. And so I've worked in various forms of adoption, from foster care to birth parent social work, to writing home studies. My husband was a pastor in New York City for about 8 years, and I was a New York program manager of a multi-state adoption agency. And then a couple years ago, we moved to Tuscaloosa, and I've been at CAC. And I actually got to go to the NEDC 2 years ago. And I wanted to say what a great experience that was, because when we moved back to the South, and that was really when I started working with embryo adoption. I really didn't know too much about it before, 2023. And being in that room with the embryo tanks was just such a holy room. It's so sacred, and just getting to meet everyone at the NEDC, just the heart behind the mission of the NEDC was just really encouraging. And even seeing the wall with the counter of how many children have been born, it's just a really beautiful thing to be a part of. So I think my past as being a client and working in different with adoptive families over the years, I've worked with birth parents, so that helps me with donor families, I feel like, who are processing a lot of the different emotions of placing embryos. And then, I want everyone to kind of be able to see the other side, like I've gotten to see, have compassion for the donor families and the adoptive families. I also want to be an agent of helping families get through the process in a way that you feel more equipped and you feel better prepared. And that, you have people who are on your side fighting for you too. So I love what I do. I feel like it's such a gift to be in this space. I love working with the NEDC. I talk to Tangi almost every day.
Yeah. And let me tell you, she loves working with you. I mean, a little behind the scenes, Tangi, our recipient coordinator, is terrific. She's been here probably 6 months. She's getting the hang of it. But I mean, somebody who's been here for 10 years, like I have, I've seen the recipient coordinators come and go, and it always takes them. It's because it's such a different world. It takes them a few months to really get the lay of the land. That's just how it is, and then they're fine from there. But you've really helped Tangi know what the lay of the land is, know what the responsibilities are, know what the processes are, so that she can then approach our recipient families and all of her tasks with much more confidence. So thank you so much for how you have helped her as she's acclimated to the new role.
She's fantastic, and she's such a delightful person. So I think everyone who interacts with her will be, she's just a light, So
She's fun, yeah. So before we go, why did you want to adopt before you had children biologically? What was it about that? It's an interesting approach. I've heard other families do it. Always interested in the reasoning for that. It was just that it's a microcosm of the gospel.
Yeah, I think it's a call, many families feel like the Lord calls them to parenting, right? And for us, we felt like when we were thinking through, well, how would we want to answer that call to parenting? Adoption just felt like the right answer to, being a reflection of the gospel, partnering with, all of the entities of adoption and the Adoption Kinship Network. And so I think it was just the right fit for us. And I've seen, you had, Ben and Emily Parker on your podcast like a week ago.
Yep.
And they had biological kids, and now they're doing embryo adoption. I have other families who are doing the same thing. And so I think some families, they come to embryo adoption after fertility, whether it's been diagnosed or not. And some are just like, I want to explore adoption, but they're not quite sure what's the right route. And like I said with the embryos, I don't feel like Laura's lining up domestic, international, all these kiddos in front of us. I think that knowing for like families who feel this is a pro-life response to a crisis in a way. And if we're, on earth waiting for the redemption of all things that's going to happen, getting these embryos out of the freezer is a response to that redemption call that families get to have. So for my husband and I, we chose to adopt internationally first because we thought it's only going to get harder after we have kiddos. So let's go ahead and do the harder one. But I think it's a really beautiful thing to partner with families in this embryo adoption space. And I talk to families all the time at CAC who are really contemplating what type of adoption to consider. And I get so excited when I talk to families considering embryo adoption because it is a, really redemptive option for families who are able to carry children. One thing we haven't really talked about yet, but the call to adoption, we link that to the call to being parents. Like we're going to go through this process and it's going to guarantee that we're going to walk away with children, right? But we see sometimes that there's failed transfers or failed adoptions or failed matches or different things. And we wonder, like, did the Lord really call us? And we see that in scriptures. Did God really say? But trusting, like I had a family who they thawed embryos and they some of them weren't viable and then some they transferred and it didn't result in a pregnancy. And when I was talking to them afterwards, I was like, these embryos are not in a straw anymore. They are in the arms of the Father. And so viewing it in that perspective of you're still a part of that redemption, even though it's not the story we want to write. But that is a redemption that the Lord has asked you to be a part of. As difficult as we want that to be parenting, we want it to be equal a baby. And hopefully that will be the case. But sometimes there's these other parts of the story that Lord is writing too.
Yeah, we're called to faithfulness, not always the results that we would like to see. And it's a great note to end the podcast on. If somebody is visiting or lives in the Tuscaloosa area, what church does your husband pastor?
He's at Calvary Baptist. So it's in the shadow of Bryant-Denny Stadium. So you
can't miss it then, right?
Yeah.
There was a pastor I really respected who said, you need to go to that Tuscaloosa, Birmingham area because it will prepare you for heaven. So congratulations on living in such a great place. Rebekah McGee at CAC, you guys do such great work, and we thank you for taking the time to join us today here on the Embryo Adoption Podcast.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the Embryo Adoption Podcast. I hope you enjoyed learning more about this life-changing option for building a family. Hey, if you or someone you know could benefit from embryo adoption or donation, visit embryodonation.org to get started or just to find out more. Again, that's embryodonation.org. And don't forget to spread the word, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Join me next time as we continue sharing inspirational stories of the embryo adoption journey. And until then, take care.